Grandpa and I were sitting in the living room when we heard the noise. Grandpa had just finished a breathing treatment, which may or may not have been why we didn't notice it sooner. He'd been prescribed 2 a day until the remains of his cough were gone, and he hated them. The little machine was too noisy, Grandpa said. The medicine tasted bad, Grandpa said. It was all a lot of fuss over nothing, but I saw the difference in his cough. Ever since the doctor had put him on the treatments, I had heard him cough maybe once or twice, but never with the volume he used to. He was practically back to his old self, and that was good. With summer already upon us, Grandpa was making plans that would take us out of the house and into the nearby woods quite often. This also made it a great incentive to take his medicine. If he wanted to go out adventuring, he needed to get his treatments finished. Grandpa had just put the little mask back on the machine when we heard an almighty rumble from just outside the window. I looked at Grandpa, wondering what it could be, but after hearing it a second time, Grandpa laughed and picked up his crossword. I had put my book down, wondering if we should be concerned about it, but Grandpa just waved it away. "It's nothing, just a bear sleeping under the back porch." "A bear?" I said, my fears not dampened in the least. "They do that from time to time. It's probably a young bear who's away from his den for the first time and just looking for a spot to sleep for the night." It was getting dark out there, the sun dipping below the trees as Grandpa and I whiled away our evening. I'd been thinking I might go out and call Glimmer so we could meet up for a walk, but the presence of a bear made me think better of it. The bears around here aren't usually keen on people, and I had little doubt that if I went messing around by the porch, I'd invoke his ire. Grandpa looked up, snorting at my look of trepidation. "It's not a big deal. Least, it's outside. Heck, I once drove about 70 miles with a real beast in the back of my truck." The one in the front yard?" I asked skeptically. "No, when I drove in Alaska." I was already on my way to the kitchen to get a couple of beers. We probably couldn't go drinking on the porch, but we could enjoy them and Grandpa's story right here in the living room. I'd opened them up and came back in, and we clinked bottles as I took a seat and settled in. "Well, if you insist, it all started with my first trip to Nome. John's younger brother woke me up one morning to tell me that Wayne was calling for me. I'd been driving truck for him for about 1.5 years now, and I was pretty happy with the job. I got to drive all over the place and see all kinds of things. The pay was good, and there was a little gas stop on the way to Taylor that served a pretty good lunch and had a cute waitress I had kind of fallen for. I was hoping that he was calling to send me in that direction, but it turned out he had bigger plans that day. 'Jack, I need you to go to Nome and make a very special delivery.' My ears perked up. I'd never been to Nome. I knew it was a pretty big city, place a young man might get into trouble if he wasn't careful, and I was excited to see a new place. We were still using the old transport trucks, and I knew that if it was a long haul, I'd be driving one of the nicer ones. The nice hauler trucks were always the best maintained, and usually had a working heater, too. I'm in. What's the job, Wayne? There's a fella in town that wants us to take a load of expensive furniture up there. It's really pretty stuff, handmade from local wood, and the guy in Nome is paying him top dollar for it. He's offering to pay us some of those top dollars if we get it there on the quick, like within 48 hours. I whistled. Nome wasn't a short drive, and to get there before the marker, I'd have to drive all night to do it. It was doable. I'd done it before, but that was going to be a hell of a drive. We talked a bit about pay, and after settling on a special rate for a special job, I got up and got ready to head out. I took my thermos, a radio I had from my army days, and dressed warm in case the heater didn't work. This was early spring, and there was still snow on the ground, but I wanted to be warm if something unforeseen popped up. Turned out, something unforeseen was waiting for me up the way. Wayne had Tallulah ready for me by the time I got there. Tallulah was our best rig. It was the closest thing to a semi-truck that we had, and the back was big enough to carry all the furniture and then some. Wayne asked if I wanted scrap, but I told him it would be a bad trip to take the dog on. Time was of the essence, and scrap was likely to slow me down. I checked the back, pulled up into the cab, and told Wayne I'd see him in a couple of days. Once you drop off your load, feel free to stop for a rest. Don't be stupid and try to cruise all the way home. You're only human. I told him I'd be careful, and one thermos of coffee later, I was on the road to Nome. The road, like I said, wasn't really a road like you'd think back then. If it was on concrete, I was in a big city or a major town or a military installation. Most of the time, I was driving on dirt roads packed tight from many wheels. The going was only bad in a few places, and the truck was heavy enough that the ice never really slowed me down much. Braking was always a harrowing experience, but it was something I'd gotten used to. Even when you weren't trying to stop on snow, the ground was stony, the dirt was flaky, and you were just as likely to slide off an embankment in the summer as winter. The trip to Nome was pretty uneventful, though I did get lost once and had to find a workaround. Luckily, a sign popped up before I got too turned around. I made it to Nome in just over 42 hours, and it was one of the first real cities I'd seen in a while. It wasn't as grand as it would become, but given that I hadn't seen a big city since driving through Atlanta to get to Basic, I was certainly impressed. It took me another hour to find the fella's address, but I soon had the furniture unloaded, with some help from his sons, and I was on my way again. I should have stopped in Nome, but after looking at what the hotels wanted for the night, I decided to head back out and just sleep in the cab after I'd gotten down the road a piece. Turned out that piece was only about an hour out of town, and by then my eyes were trying to snap shut like cheap window shades. I pulled over to the side of the road, made sure everything was as secure as it could be, and stretched out across the seat to catch a little rest. I had slept for about 6 hours when suddenly something rattled the truck. I was pulled awake by a sudden jolt, and as the wheels settled, I wondered how much of that had been a dream and how much had been reality. I looked around the cab and realized I wasn't going to get any answers in there. Stepping out into the cold March air, I checked the truck for damage. The trailer was fine, the wheels intact, and everything appeared to be ship-shape. I checked the inside of the trailer and saw that the big blanket that had covered the furniture was still there, but whatever had jounced the truck had knocked the flaps loose that kept the back covered. I retied it and got back in the cab, now fully awake and ready to roll again. I had driven a while, heading for home, when something moved in the back of the trailer. It wasn't much, just a little shift, but it made me wonder if the blanket was the only thing back there. I thought about pulling over to check, but opted against it. I could feel the way the wind was hitting the side of the trailer and just knew that it would be colder than a witch's tit out there. I was hoping to make some miles before stopping again, and as we rolled along, it seemed like smooth sailing. I had a few more hours of easy driving to go, but eventually my luck ran out. I was navigating some tricky turns, the road narrow and a little icy, when I took one of them a little too hard. I heard something slide in the back, and when it connected with the side of the trailer, it loosed an angry roar that sounded huge. I was so surprised by the noise I nearly ran off the road. I wondered if I'd fallen asleep at the wheel when something slammed into the other side of the trailer. It hit the wall, bouncing like a pinball as I tried to keep the truck from tipping over. Whatever it was huge. It took everything I had to keep from sliding off the edge, and as it roared again, I thought I had a monster in the back of the truck. It was heavy enough to jounce the trailer, but not quite heavy enough to tip it over. I could hear the angry sound of metal as it grated long claws over the inside, and I expected to see holes at any minute. I was terrified to stop, thinking it might get into the cab if it knew I was in there. Finally, I just slowed down some so it could escape if it wanted to. I felt a cold draft a moment later, and wouldn't realize till I stopped afterwards why. The thing had torn a gash in the back cab about as wide as my hand, and the claw it had used to do it had missed me by inches. At the time, though, all I felt was a sudden rush of air, followed by a huge jounce that felt like something had hit the back of the truck again. I looked in the mirror and saw the length of canvas that covered the back of the trailer flapping in the middle of the road, and the body of an absolutely massive grizzly bear barely visible beneath it. The paws, however, were on full display, and they were the biggest I had ever seen. I could feel it watching me as I drove away, and I didn't dare stop until I had put many, many miles between us. I was fully awake then, and I would be for the next 12 hours. I made the trip back in record time, and when Wayne asked what had happened to the back of the trailer, I told him the story. To my surprise, he laughed. "You gotta watch where you stop around here, Jack. You'll get all kinds of stowaways if you park too close to the woods for too long. Don't worry, I won't take the repairs out of your pay this time." I was always careful when I parked for the night after that, but that furry fellow wasn't the only passenger I ever had. As I sat listening to Grandpa's story, the snores of the bear made a fitting backdrop. "Sounds like an unbearable situation," I said, and Grandpa rolled his eyes as he chuckled in spite of the corn. "I guess you could say it was a grisly experience. He was definitely the worst guest I had in my truck," Grandpa said, covering a yawn as he sat back in his chair. "That reminded me of something else. Hey, didn't you tell me once you picked up Santa Claus? I could have sworn you said you did, but you never told me if it was in Georgia or But that's when I heard a second snoring join the first, and I knew that story time was over. I threw one of the big blankets over Grandpa and went upstairs to get ready for bed. Grandpa snored happily in his easy chair as he dreamed of frozen roads, great bears, and times gone by. You're still here. I thought you might be. Thanks for joining me for tonight's story. If your insatiable appetite for horror knows no bounds, might I suggest one of our playlists, or one of our previous stories in the archive? There should be one appearing at the end of the story any minute now. And of course, if you're not subscribed, why not go ahead and hit that subscribe button? Maybe hit that notification bell so you don't miss any of the spooky things that we do here. If you prefer your horror a little more analog, you can always pick up one of my books. There's a link below to my latest, and it'll take you to all the great things that I've posted on Amazon. For my book lovers in the audience, I always suggest coming on down to Patreon so you can become part of my ghostly reader tier and get a book anytime I write one, which is usually about twice a year. Speaking of my patrons, let's go ahead and thank them, shall we? Thanks to Unicorn Hollow for being our spooky ghost contributor. Thanks to Janet and Lady Vengeance for being our spooky skeleton tier contributors. Thanks to Hi Stacy, Winter, Xaronan, Emily Coltsfoot, Stephanie Carrington, Marianne Schuler, Tyler Parker, and Jennifer Damron for being our ghostly reader tier contributors. Thanks, everyone. We just couldn't do the show without you. If you think you might like to support the show in a more monetary fashion, come on down to Patreon. I have many tiers. I'm sure you'll find one that suits you best. I always recommend the Ghostly Reader tier, since you get a signed book anytime I write one on your doorstep. But I have many tiers, and again, I'm sure you'll find one to suit you. And as always, thanks for stopping by. Dr. Plague, signing off. Have a wonderful evening.